The telegram had said her intended groom was tall and honest, but the man waiting on the platform at Snowflake, Arizona, looked like he had weathered 100 storms and lost them all. Delilah Turner pressed her gloved hands against the train window, watching Franklin Zimmerman shuffle his worn boots against the dusty wooden planks below. His hat pulled low over what she could only assume was a face hardened by disappointment. It was July of 1885, and the desert heat shimmered across the small settlement like a living thing, distorting the scattered buildings and making the whole scene feel unreal. She had traveled 3 weeks from Boston, leaving behind her mother's fresh grave and a city that held nothing but memories of loss. Yet now that the moment had arrived, her feet refused to carry her toward the train's exit. "Miss, we need to be moving along," the conductor said, appearing beside her seat with an expression that mixed sympathy with impatience. "This is your stop, is it not?" Delilah nodded but did not rise. Through the window, she watched Franklin remove his hat and wipe his brow with a handkerchief that had seen better days. He was perhaps 30 years old, give or take a few years, with sun-darkened skin and shoulders that suggested hard work. But there was something in his posture, a hesitance that mirrored her own, that made her wonder if he was equally uncertain about this arrangement. "Miss Turner," the conductor's voice grew firmer, "the train cannot wait indefinitely." "I know," she whispered, though still she did not move. Her carpetbag sat at her feet, containing everything she owned in this world: 3 dresses, her mother's Bible, a silver locket, and a bundle of letters from Franklin that had been proper and polite, but revealed almost nothing of the man himself. What was she doing? She had agreed to this arrangement in a fog of grief, responding to his advertisement because staying in Boston meant facing an empty apartment and creditors who cared nothing for her mourning. But now the reality pressed down upon her like the oppressive Arizona heat. She could feel even through the train car's walls. Franklin looked up then, and their eyes met through the glass. His face was rugged but not unkind, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into harsh sunlight. He offered a tentative smile and raised one hand in greeting. Delilah felt her heart hammer against her ribs. "I cannot," she said suddenly, turning to the conductor. "I have made a terrible mistake." The conductor sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of having witnessed this scene before. "Miss, I understand this is overwhelming, but you have made an agreement with that gentleman. The least you can do is speak with him." "No," Delilah said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "No, I will not leave this train. Please tell the engineer to continue on. I will go to California or back to Boston or anywhere but here." Outside, Franklin had noticed the delay. He approached the train car, climbing the steps to the platform between cars. Delilah heard his boots on the metal, heard the door to her car slide open. She turned her face away, fixing her gaze on the red rocks visible in the distance, their formations rising like ancient cathedrals from the earth. "Miss Turner." His voice was deeper than she had imagined, roughened by years of calling to cattle across open ranges. "I am Franklin Zimmerman. I hope your journey was not too difficult." She said nothing, her hands twisting in her lap. From the corner of her eye she could see him standing in the aisle, hat in hand, unsure of whether to approach closer. "I know this must be strange for you," he continued, taking a cautious step forward, "meeting a stranger and being expected to build a life with him. But I promise you I am a man of my word. The letters I wrote were truthful. I have a ranch 15 miles from here, small but growing. I can provide for you. You will want for nothing." "Except love," Delilah said quietly, still not looking at him. "Except knowing the man I am meant to spend my life with, except feeling anything but this terrible, hollow fear." She heard him exhale slowly. "I understand you are afraid, but fear is natural when facing the unknown. Give me a chance, Miss Turner. Give us both a chance." Now she did turn to look at him fully. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a startling gray, like storm clouds over the ocean she had left behind. There was kindness in them, she thought, but also a weariness that went bone deep. He was not a bad man, she could sense that much. But her mother had told her, in those final fevered days before pneumonia took her, that she should marry only for love. That life was too short and too hard to spend it beside someone who did not make your soul sing. "My mother died 6 weeks ago," Delilah said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Pneumonia. I nursed her for 3 weeks and still she slipped away. I was not ready. I will never be ready. And I answered your advertisement because I could not bear to stay in our apartment, where everything reminded me of her. But I realize now that running away is not the same as moving forward." Franklin's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I am sorry for your loss. Losing a parent is a grief that never fully heals. My own mother passed 8 years ago, and there are still days when I turn to tell her something before remembering she is gone." Despite herself, Delilah felt a small crack in the wall she had built around her heart. What was she like? "Strong," Franklin said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Stronger than my father ever was, truth be told. She came west with him in a covered wagon when she was only 17, and she never complained, not even when times were hardest. She taught me to read using a single book of poetry she had brought from Virginia. I can still recite some of the verses." "My mother loved poetry too," Delilah said softly. "And music. She had a beautiful singing voice. Our neighbors would ask her to sing at weddings and christenings. Her favorite song was an old Irish ballad called The Parting Glass. She sang it constantly when I was a child. I can close my eyes and hear her voice still." The train whistle blew, a sharp sound that made them both start. The conductor appeared again, his patience clearly exhausted. "Mr. Zimmerman, I need you to either convince this young lady to disembark or leave the train yourself. We are already behind schedule." Franklin looked at Delilah, then at the conductor, then back at Delilah. "Give me 5 more minutes, please." The conductor checked his pocket watch with exaggerated deliberation. 5 minutes, not 1 second more. When they were alone again, Franklin sat down in the seat across from Delilah, his hat still turning in his hands. "I will not force you to stay, Miss Turner. If you truly wish to continue on, I will step off this train and consider our arrangement dissolved. But I am asking you to give me a chance to show you that this could be a good life. Not perfect, perhaps, but good. Honest. Built on mutual respect and, in time, perhaps something more." "You speak of respect," Delilah said, "but you do not know me. I do not know you. How can we respect what we do not know?" "Then let us learn," Franklin said earnestly. "Come to the ranch for 1 week. If after 7 days you wish to leave, I will personally escort you back to this station and buy you a ticket to anywhere you wish to go. But give us 1 week to see if there might be a foundation worth building on." Delilah wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her to remain on this train and let it carry her away from this uncomfortable situation. But something in Franklin's eyes, some quality of honest desperation, made her hesitate. He was not a man accustomed to begging, she sensed. This vulnerability cost him something. "I do not think I can," she said finally. "I am sorry, Mr. Zimmerman. You seem a decent man, but I am not ready for this. I thought I was, but I am not." Franklin's shoulders sagged slightly, but he nodded. "I understand." He stood, preparing to leave, then paused. "Your mother's favorite song." "The Parting Glass, I know it." Delilah looked up at him in surprise. "You do?" "My mother sang it too," he said. "Different words, perhaps, but the same melody." Irish immigrants brought it to Virginia and it spread from there. It is a song about farewell, about leaving friends and loved ones behind. Yes, Delilah whispered, feeling tears prick at her eyes. She sang it at my father's funeral and at her sister's, and finally I sang it at hers, though my voice broke on every other word. Franklin was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. Then, so softly she almost did not hear it, he began to sing. His voice was untrained but true, carrying the old melody with a tenderness that pierced straight through her carefully constructed defenses. Of all the money that ever I had, I spent it in good company, and all the harm I have ever done, alas, it was to none but me, and all I have done for want of wit to memory now I cannot recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Delilah felt the tears spill over, tracking down her cheeks. It was her mother's voice she heard in the melody, her mother's presence filling the train car. Franklin continued, his voice growing stronger with each line. Of all the comrades that ever I had, they are sorry for my going away. And all the sweethearts that ever I had, they would wish me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I will gently rise and softly call, good night and joy be with you all. When he finished, the silence in the train car was profound. Even the conductor, who had returned to enforce his deadline, stood frozen in the aisle. Delilah wiped at her face with trembling fingers, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. My mother taught me that song when I was 7 years old, Franklin said quietly. She said it was important to know how to say goodbye with grace because life is full of partings. But she also taught me that some meetings are worth holding on to, worth fighting for. The conductor cleared his throat. Miss, I truly must insist I will go with him, Delilah heard herself say. The words emerged without conscious decision, pulled from some deep place within her that recognized something true in this rough cowboy who knew her mother's favorite song. 1 week, as he proposed, Franklin's entire face transformed with relief and something that might have been joy. Truly, Delilah said, though her hands shook as she reached for her carpet bag. Though I reserve the right to change my mind at any point during those 7 days. Fair enough, Franklin said, and the smile he offered her was like sunrise breaking over dark mountains. He extended his hand to help her rise, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was calloused and warm, the hand of a man who worked with his body every day. But his grip was gentle as he steadied her, and he released her the moment she found her balance. The conductor muttered something about women and indecision as he helped them with Delilah's trunk, a battered thing that had belonged to her grandmother. Franklin lifted it easily despite its weight, muscles flexing beneath his faded work shirt. Together they descended from the train onto the platform, where the heat hit Delilah like a physical blow. It takes some getting used to, Franklin said, noticing her immediate discomfort. But the ranch house stays cool, and the nights are actually quite pleasant. Nothing like the humid heat I understand you have back east. The train pulled away with a great huffing of steam and screeching of wheels, and Delilah watched it go with a pang of regret. Her last connection to the world she knew disappeared around a bend, leaving her standing in this strange desert town with a man who was little more than a stranger. My wagon is just over here, Franklin said, gesturing toward a serviceable rig hitched to 2 sturdy horses. I hope you do not mind the ride. It is about an hour to the ranch. Delilah allowed him to help her up onto the wagon seat, acutely aware of the few townspeople who had gathered to watch the mail-order bride arrive. She could feel their curious gazes, hear the whispered speculations. It was exactly the kind of attention she loathed. Franklin seemed to sense her discomfort. As he climbed up beside her and took the reins, he said quietly, "They mean no harm. Life out here is simple, and the arrival of anyone new is cause for interest. But they will lose interest soon enough, and then you will have all the privacy you could want, sometimes too much of it." As they pulled away from the small cluster of buildings that constituted downtown Snowflake, Delilah forced herself to look around properly. The town sat in a high valley surrounded by hills and mesas, with the distant mountains providing a dramatic backdrop. The vegetation was sparse compared to New England, but there was a stark beauty to the landscape that she had not expected. Juniper trees dotted the hillsides, and the endless sky stretched overhead in a blue so intense it hurt to look at directly. "Snowflake is a Mormon settlement," Franklin explained as they drove. "Founded about 10 years ago. I am not Mormon myself, but they are good neighbors. Honest and hardworking. They have helped me more than once when times were difficult. And you? Where are you from originally?" Delilah asked, partly from genuine curiosity and partly to fill the awkward silence. "Virginia, as I mentioned. My father brought us west after the war. He had fought for the Confederacy and could not bear to stay in a defeated South. He was looking for a fresh start, I suppose. We tried mining in Colorado first, but he had no talent for it. Then we came here and he bought land cheap. Cattle ranching suited him better, though he never lived to see the ranch become profitable. He died of a rattlesnake bite when I was 19. "I am sorry," Delilah said, and meant it. Franklin shrugged, but she could see the old pain in the set of his jaw. "It was a long time ago. My mother held things together for another year after that, but I think losing him broke something in her. She caught a fever the following winter and was gone within 3 days. So I understand something of your loss, Miss Turner. I understand what it is to be alone in the world." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking and the horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust from the road. Delilah noticed how Franklin handled the team with easy competence, his weathered hands light on the reins. He was comfortable out here in a way she could not imagine ever being. "Why did you place an advertisement for a wife?" she asked finally. "Surely there are women in the territory who might have been willing to marry you without need for such arrangements." Franklin was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "There are few unmarried women out here, and those who are available have their choice of suitors. I am not much to look at, and my ranch, while successful enough to live on, is not impressive compared to some of the larger spreads. I placed the advertisement because I was lonely, Miss Turner, plain and simple. The days are long and the nights are longer, and there is only so much satisfaction a man can take from honest work and the company of cattle." His honesty surprised her. "You could have lied, made yourself sound more prosperous or handsome than you are." "I could have," he agreed. "But what would be the point? You would have arrived and seen the truth soon enough. And besides, I was raised to believe that a relationship built on lies is no relationship at all." Delilah found herself studying his profile as he drove. He was not handsome in the classical sense, with his weathered skin and slightly crooked nose that suggested it had been broken at least once. But there was something solid about him, something dependable. He was exactly what he claimed to be, which was more than she could say for many of the men she had known in Boston. "I should tell you," she said carefully, "that I have no experience with ranch life. I grew up in a city. I can sew and cook and keep house, but I know nothing of cattle or horses or whatever else one does on a ranch." "I would not expect you to," Franklin assured her. "I have a hired hand, a young man named Timothy who helps with the heavy work. And you are right that ranch life is different from city life. But I am not asking you to become someone you are not. I am simply asking you to give this life a chance, to give me a chance." The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, and Delilah felt her breath catch. It was smaller than she had imagined, but somehow more real. A low adobe house sat near a creek lined with cottonwood trees, their leaves shimmering silver green in the hot breeze. A barn and several corrals completed the main buildings, and beyond them stretched open rangeland dotted with grazing cattle. It was not grand, but there was something appealing about its neat simplicity. "That is home," Franklin said, and she heard the pride in his voice. "I built the house myself with my father. The barn came later after he was gone. It is not much compared to what you are probably accustomed to, but it is solid and comfortable." As they approached, a young man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He was perhaps 20, with an open, friendly face and hair the color of wheat. "That is Timothy," Franklin said. "Timothy Grant. He has worked for me for 2 years now, good with horses and better with cattle, quiet but reliable." Timothy approached with evident curiosity as Franklin brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Miss Turner, this is Timothy Grant. Timothy, Miss Delilah Turner, who has come from Boston." "Pleased to meet you, miss," Timothy said, bobbing his head respectfully. "Welcome to the ranch." "Thank you," Delilah managed, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. She was here, at this remote ranch with these men she did not know, committed to spending a week in circumstances she could barely imagine. Franklin helped her down from the wagon with careful courtesy, then retrieved her trunk. "Let me show you the house. Timothy, can you see to the horses?" "Yes, sir," Timothy said, already moving to unhitch the team. The interior of the adobe house was dim after the brilliant sunlight, and blessedly cool. Delilah blinked as her eyes adjusted, taking in the main room that served as both kitchen and living area. The furniture was simple but well made, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and windows with actual glass panes letting in filtered light. Everything was surprisingly clean and organized for a bachelor household. "There are 3 rooms," Franklin explained, setting her trunk down. "This main room, my bedroom there, and a second bedroom here that I use mostly for storage. I have cleared it out for you. It has a proper bed and a wardrobe. Not fancy, but serviceable." He opened the door to show her a small room with whitewashed walls, a simple iron bedstead with what looked like new linens, and indeed a wardrobe that, while scarred and battered, stood solidly against one wall. A single window looked out toward the creek and the cottonwoods. "I had Timothy's sister come over last week to help me prepare the room," Franklin admitted. "I wanted it to be welcoming. She also helped me stock the kitchen properly. I am afraid my own cooking runs to beef and beans mostly, and I thought you might appreciate having the ingredients for more varied meals." Delilah felt an unexpected warmth toward this rough cowboy who had gone to such trouble. "That was very thoughtful of you." Franklin ducked his head, looking almost bashful. "I will leave you to settle in. Take whatever time you need. There is a pump in the kitchen for water and an outhouse behind the barn. I apologize that the facilities are not more refined, but this is the reality of ranch life." When he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Delilah sank down onto the bed and let out a long, shaky breath. What had she done? This was madness. She should have stayed on that train, should have continued to California or turned back to Boston. Anything but this leap into complete uncertainty. But then she remembered Franklin's voice lifting in song, remembered the way he had offered her mother's favorite melody like a gift. That had not been a calculated move. He could not have known what that song meant to her, could not have anticipated that it would be the key to unlock her frozen resistance. It had been pure chance, or perhaps something more than chance. Perhaps it had been fate. Delilah rose and moved to the window, looking out at the unfamiliar landscape. The cottonwoods swayed gently in the breeze, and she could hear the pleasant burble of the creek. In the corral, she could see Franklin and Timothy working with the horses, their movements easy and coordinated from long practice. As she watched, Franklin threw back his head and laughed at something Timothy said, and the sound carried across the yard, warm and genuine. She had 1 week. 7 days to decide if she could build a life in this strange place with this kind, careful man who knew her mother's favorite song. 7 days to determine if duty and pragmatism could become the foundation for something more. 7 days to choose between running back to the ashes of her old life or stepping forward into the uncertainty of the new. Delilah unpacked her carpetbag slowly, hanging her 3 dresses in the wardrobe and placing her mother's Bible on the small table beside the bed. The silver locket she fastened around her neck, its weight a familiar comfort. Then she sat down again and allowed herself to cry, quietly and without restraint, for everything she had lost and everything she was afraid to hope for. When her tears were spent, she washed her face in the basin that had been provided, tidied her hair, and went out to face her new reality. Franklin was in the main room, standing at the stove with an expression of concentration as he worked on what appeared to be an attempt at preparing dinner. "I thought I would try my hand at something beyond beans," he said when he noticed her, "but I am beginning to think I overestimated my abilities. Do you know anything about making biscuits?" Despite everything, Delilah felt a smile tug at her lips. "I do, actually. My mother taught me." "Would you like help?" The relief on his face was almost comical. "I would be deeply grateful. Timothy will be in shortly, and I would prefer not to poison either of you on your first night here." Working together in the kitchen, with Franklin following her instructions with careful attention, Delilah felt some of her tension begin to ease. This was familiar territory, the domestic work she had done all her life. Her hands knew how to mix flour and lard, how to judge the consistency of dough, how to shape biscuits that would rise properly. Franklin proved to be an apt student, watching closely and asking intelligent questions. "My mother tried to teach me," he admitted, "but I was young and foolish and thought such things were beneath me. I wish now I had paid better attention." "You are learning now," Delilah said. "That is what matters." Timothy joined them for dinner, initially shy in Delilah's presence but gradually relaxing as the meal progressed. The biscuits were a success, served alongside beef stew that Franklin had, despite his protests of limited ability, actually prepared quite competently. "This is the best meal I have had in months," Timothy declared, reaching for his 3rd biscuit. "No offense intended, Mr. Zimmerman." "None taken," Franklin said with a laugh. "I am well aware of my limitations. Miss Turner is clearly a superior cook." "Please call me Delilah," she said impulsively. "If we are to share a household, even temporarily, formality seems unnecessary." Franklin met her eyes across the table. "Then you must call me Franklin, or Frank, as Timothy does when he forgets to be respectful." The evening passed more pleasantly than Delilah had anticipated. After dinner, Timothy returned to his own small cabin near the barn, and Franklin showed Delilah around the property in the gentler light of approaching sunset. He explained the ranch's operation with obvious pride, pointing out the water rights that made his land valuable, the quality of his breeding stock, the improvements he hoped to make in the coming years. "I know it is not impressive compared to the great ranches," he said as they stood by the creek, watching the water flow past. "But it is mine, built with my own hands and my own choices. Every fence post, every acre of cleared land, represents work I have done. Does that make sense?" "It does," Delilah said softly. She understood ownership in a way she suspected few women did. Her mother had owned their apartment building in Boston, a rare independence she had achieved through careful saving and shrewd investment. Delilah had grown up understanding that property and independence were intimately connected. As darkness fell, and the stars began to emerge in impossible numbers, Franklin escorted Delilah back to the house. At the door to her bedroom, he paused. "Thank you for staying," he said quietly. "For giving this a chance. I know it took courage, or madness," Delilah replied, but without heat. "I suppose we will discover which." That night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert, Delilah thought about her mother's final words. "Marry for love," she had said. But she had also said something else in one of her more lucid moments. "Love is not always a lightning strike, my darling. Sometimes it is a seed that must be planted and tended before it can grow." Perhaps that was what she was doing here, planting a seed, giving it a chance to take root. And if it did not grow, well, she would know she had at least tried. The next morning arrived with a brilliance that seemed impossible to someone accustomed to Boston's gray dawns. Delilah woke to find sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of men's voices outside. She dressed quickly in her simplest calico dress and ventured out to find Franklin and Timothy already deep in the day's work. "We rise early here," Franklin explained when he saw her, his expression apologetic. "The heat of midday makes heavy work difficult, so we try to accomplish as much as possible in the morning and evening. But please do not feel obligated to match our schedule. Rest as much as you need." "I am not accustomed to idleness," Delilah said, a touch of sharpness in her voice. "What can I do to help?" Franklin exchanged a glance with Timothy. "Well, if you are truly willing, the chicken coop could use attention. The hens have been laying poorly, and I suspect the coop needs a thorough cleaning. It is not pleasant work, I warn you." Delilah rolled up her sleeves. "Show me where it is." The chicken coop was indeed in need of attention, and the work was hot and dirty and thoroughly unpleasant. But there was also something satisfying about it, about seeing visible improvement from her efforts. By mid-morning, she had cleaned the coop thoroughly, replaced the bedding, and even managed to collect a respectable number of eggs. Franklin found her washing up at the pump, her face flushed with heat and exertion. "You did not have to do that," he said, but his eyes showed approval. "That was several hours of hard work." "I told you I am not afraid of work," Delilah said. "I may not know cattle or horses, but I understand how to maintain a household and property. Timothy and I are heading out to check on the herd in the north pasture," Franklin said. "We will be gone most of the afternoon. Will you be all right here alone?" The thought of being truly alone with no other human being within shouting distance was both terrifying and oddly appealing. "I will be fine. I thought I might explore the house more, perhaps prepare something for dinner." Franklin hesitated, then said, "There is a rifle above the door frame." "Do you know how to shoot?" "No," Delilah admitted. "Then do not touch it unless absolutely necessary. The ranch is safe, but we occasionally see rattlesnakes, and once in a while a mountain lion comes down from the hills. If you see either, get inside immediately and wait for us to return." After the men left, the silence of the ranch settled around Delilah like a blanket. She spent some time exploring the house more thoroughly, opening cupboards and learning the layout of Franklin's domain. His bedroom, glimpsed briefly through an open door, was Spartan but neat, with a large bed covered in a quilt that showed evidence of careful if amateur stitching. On the small table beside the bed sat a daguerreotype in a simple frame. Delilah knew she should not intrude, but curiosity drew her into the room. The daguerreotype showed a severe-looking man and a woman with kind eyes, standing stiffly before the camera in their best clothes. Franklin's parents, she realized. She could see Franklin in the woman's eyes and the set of the man's jaw. Beside the daguerreotype was a small stack of books, their covers worn from repeated reading. She picked up the top one, a volume of poetry by Longfellow, so worn that the spine was cracked. Inside the front cover, in faded ink, was written, "To my darling boy, that you may always carry beauty with you. Mother." The date was 1869, which would have made Franklin perhaps 14 years old. Delilah carefully replaced the book, feeling like she had intruded on something private. But the discovery warmed her toward this rough cowboy who kept his mother's gift of poetry beside his bed and read it until the binding broke. She spent the rest of the afternoon preparing dinner, using the supplies Franklin had stocked to make a proper meal. There was a smokehouse with preserved meats, a root cellar with vegetables that Timothy apparently grew in a small garden patch, and a pantry with flour, sugar, and other staples. By the time she heard horses approaching, she had created a beef pie and was just pulling it from the oven. Franklin and Timothy entered the house covered in dust and clearly exhausted, but both men stopped short when they smelled the cooking. "Is that what I think it is?" Timothy asked, his young face lighting up. "Beef pie," Delilah confirmed. "I hope you are hungry." "I could eat a horse," Timothy declared, then blushed at his own enthusiasm. "Begging your pardon for the crude expression, miss." "Delilah," she reminded him gently, "and no pardon necessary. Honest hunger is nothing to apologize for. That dinner was even better than the first." The men were full of talk about the herd, about cattle that needed attention, about plans for improving the range. Delilah listened, gradually learning the language and rhythms of ranch life. Franklin, she noticed, had a talent for leadership, giving Timothy responsibilities while also teaching him. There was affection between them, an easy camaraderie born of shared work. The days began to settle into a rhythm. Delilah rose early and prepared breakfast, then took on various household tasks while the men worked outside. She discovered the garden Timothy had mentioned and began weeding and watering it, coaxing the heat-stressed plants back to health. She mended clothes, cleaned, and experimented with cooking in the wood stove until she mastered its particular quirks. In the evenings after dinner, Franklin began reading aloud from his mother's poetry book. It started the third night, when Delilah mentioned how much she missed having books. Franklin had fetched the Longfellow volume almost shyly and asked if she would like to hear some verses. Timothy often joined them, and the three of them would sit in the cooling darkness, listening to Franklin's deep voice bring the poems to life. Delilah found herself looking forward to these evenings most of all. There was something intimate about the readings, about the way Franklin's voice would soften on certain lines, about the way they would sometimes discuss a particular poem afterward. She was learning that Franklin was better educated than his rough appearance suggested, that his mother had instilled in him not just a love of poetry but a genuine appreciation for language and beauty. On the fifth day, Franklin asked if she would like to learn to ride. "You cannot really know the ranch without seeing more of it," he explained. "And out here, being able to ride is an important skill. You never know when you might need to get somewhere quickly." Delilah agreed, though the prospect was intimidating. She had never been on a horse in her life. Franklin selected the gentlest mare, a patient old creature named Daisy, and spent the morning teaching Delilah the basics. He was a good teacher, patient and encouraging, never mocking her mistakes or showing impatience with her fear. "You are doing wonderfully," he said as she managed to walk Daisy in a circle around the corral. "Better than I did my first time. I fell off within 5 minutes and broke my arm." "That is not encouraging," Delilah protested, but she was laughing. By afternoon, Franklin declared her ready for a short ride beyond the immediate ranch buildings. They rode out together at a sedate walk, with Franklin pointing out landmarks and explaining the boundaries of his property. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, and Delilah was struck by both its vastness and its subtle beauty. The red rocks, the hardy plants, the way the light changed the colors as the sun moved across the sky, it was nothing like Boston, but it had its own stark magnificence. They stopped beside a natural spring, where water bubbled up from the rocks to create a small pool surrounded by greenery. Franklin dismounted and helped Delilah down, his hands strong and steady on her waist. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," he admitted. "I come here when I need to think. There is something peaceful about it." They sat on the rocks beside the pool, and Franklin pulled out a canteen and some biscuits he had thought to bring. As they shared the simple meal, Delilah found herself studying his profile again. Somewhere over the past 5 days, he had become familiar to her. She knew the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the particular set of his shoulders when he was tired, the sound of his laughter. He was no longer a stranger exactly, though she could not say yet what he was to her. "You have not spoken much about Boston," Franklin said, breaking into her thoughts. "Do you miss it?" Delilah considered the question honestly. "I miss my mother. I miss certain places that hold memories of her. But the city itself? No, not really. I was lonely there after she died. I had some friends, but no family. No one who truly needed me. Here." She paused, searching for the right words. "Here I feel useful. I can see the results of my work. The garden is healthier. The chicken coop is clean. You and Timothy eat better meals." It may sound simple, but there is satisfaction in it. "It does not sound simple," Franklin said quietly. "It sounds essential. A home is more than just walls and a roof. It is what happens inside those walls, the daily acts of care and effort. You have made this house feel like a home again." I had not realized how much I missed that. Their eyes met, and Delilah felt something shift in her chest, some barrier beginning to dissolve. She was not in love with Franklin Zimmerman, not yet. But she could see the possibility of it, could feel the first tender shoots of affection beginning to take root. "I have been thinking," she said carefully, "about my mother's advice. She told me to marry only for love. But the more I consider it, the more I think she meant something different than I first understood. She was not speaking of romantic passion, though I am sure she would have welcomed that. She meant a deeper thing: respect, companionship, genuine care for another person's well-being. Those things can be the foundation for love if given time to grow." Franklin was very still beside her. "And have you found those things here? Even in these few days?" "I think I have begun to," Delilah admitted. "You have been nothing but kind and respectful. You have not pushed me or demanded anything beyond what I offered freely. You have made me feel safe and valued. That is no small thing, Franklin." He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense. "I am glad. Because from my side, I can tell you that these 5 days have been the happiest I have known in years. Coming home to a lit house, to good food and pleasant conversation, to your smile, it has reminded me what I was missing, what I did not even realize I needed so desperately." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the burble of the spring and the wind in the juniper trees. Delilah felt Franklin's hand move closer to hers on the rock, not quite touching, just near enough that she could feel his warmth. She found herself moving her own hand that final inch, until their fingers brushed. Franklin looked down at their nearly touching hands, then back up at her face. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Delilah nodded, and he gently laced his fingers through hers. His hand was so much larger than hers, weathered and calloused, but his grip was tender. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, watching the play of sunlight on water on the ride back to the ranch. Delilah felt different somehow, as if she had crossed some invisible threshold. That evening, during the poetry reading, she found herself watching Franklin's mouth as he formed the words, noticing the way his accent softened on certain vowels, the care he took with the meter. When he finished the poem and looked up at her, she did not look away. The 6th day arrived too quickly. Delilah woke with the awareness that she would need to make a decision soon. Tomorrow, Franklin would ask if she wanted to stay or return to the train station. The thought of leaving now, of going back to Boston or continuing on to California alone, made her chest ache with an emptiness that surprised her. She was falling in love, she realized. Not the lightning strike her younger self had imagined, but something slower and deeper. Something built on shared work and quiet conversations and small acts of kindness. Something that felt solid and real in a way her girlish dreams never had. But admitting that to Franklin felt impossibly vulnerable. What if she was mistaken? What if her feelings were simply gratitude or loneliness masquerading as love? What if she stayed and then regretted it? Franklin seemed to sense her inner turmoil. That morning, he suggested they spend the day working together on repairing fence line, a task that would keep them close but also busy enough to prevent awkward conversations. Delilah agreed, grateful for the reprieve. The work was hot and difficult, but Delilah found she did not mind. There was something meditative about the repetitive tasks of stretching wire and hammering staples. Franklin worked steadily beside her, occasionally offering instruction or taking on the heavier aspects of the work. Timothy had gone to town for supplies, so it was just the two of them under the endless blue sky. "Tell me about your father," Franklin said during a water break. "You have spoken often of your mother but rarely mention him." Delilah wiped sweat from her brow. "He died when I was 12. A factory accident. He worked in a textile mill and there was a fire. He got several workers out before going back in for one more and the floor collapsed." She paused, old grief rising up. "He was a hero," they said, "but I would rather have had him alive." "Of course you would," Franklin said softly. "Heroism is cold comfort to those left behind." "My mother never remarried," Delilah continued. "She said she had given her heart once and could not do so again. She worked as a seamstress and saved every penny, eventually buying the apartment building we lived in. She was the strongest person I ever knew. She sounds remarkable. I wish I could have met her." Delilah looked at him, seeing the genuine regret in his eyes. "I think she would have liked you. She always said a good man was one who kept his promises and treated people with respect. You are that kind of man, Franklin." "I try to be," he said. "My parents taught me that honor is not about grand gestures but about daily choices, about doing right even when it is difficult or inconvenient." They returned to work, but Delilah felt the conversation lingering between them, another small thread being woven into the connection growing between them. That evening, Timothy returned from town full of news. There was to be a dance the following Saturday in Snowflake, a social gathering for all the surrounding ranches and farms. Everyone was invited, and Franklin was expected to attend. "And you should bring Miss Delilah," Timothy said enthusiastically. "It would be a good opportunity for her to meet people, make some friends. It gets lonely out here without female companionship." Franklin looked uncertain. "I do not know if Delilah would be comfortable with that. A gathering of strangers, all curious about the mail-order bride." "I would like to go," Delilah said, surprising herself. "Timothy is right. If I am to live here, I should meet the community. And I do enjoy dancing." Franklin's face brightened. "Then we will go. I should warn you I am not much of a dancer, 2 left feet as my mother used to say." "Then I will teach you," Delilah said with a smile. "We have a week to practice." But of course, they did not have a week. They had only one more day before her trial period ended and she would have to give her answer. That night, lying in bed and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into sleep, Delilah tried to imagine leaving, tried to picture herself back on a train, heading away from this place and this man. The thought brought tears to her eyes. She knew her answer. Had known it, perhaps, since Franklin had sung her mother's song. But fear still held her back, fear of committing to this enormous change, of trusting her future to a man she had known for less than a week, of building a life so completely different from anything she had planned. The seventh morning arrived gray and overcast, rare weather for the Arizona high desert. There was moisture in the air, the promise of rain. Franklin was quiet at breakfast, his eyes returning again and again to Delilah's face, clearly trying to read her decision there. After Timothy left for his morning chores, Franklin cleared his throat. "It has been 7 days," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I told you I would honor my promise. If you wish to leave, I will take you to the station this afternoon. There is a train through tomorrow morning. Or—" He paused, and when he continued, his voice was rough with emotion. "Or you could stay, not as a mail-order bride fulfilling an obligation, but as yourself, choosing this life, choosing me if you are willing." Delilah took a deep breath, her heart hammering. This was the moment. The choice that would determine the course of her entire life. "I need to know something first," she said. "Do you love me, Franklin? Or am I simply a convenient solution to your loneliness?" He did not answer immediately, and she appreciated that. He thought about the question, giving it the weight it deserved. When he spoke, his words were slow and careful. "I am not sure I know what love is, Delilah. My parents loved each other, I know that. I saw it in the way they looked at each other, the way they worked together, the way they faced hardship as a team. If love is wanting someone's happiness more than your own convenience, if it is thinking about that person constantly when they are not near, if it is feeling like the world has more color and meaning because they are in it, then yes, I love you. Or at least I am falling in love with you. These 7 days have shown me what my life could be, and I do not want to go back to how it was before." Tears were streaming down Delilah's face, but she was smiling. "I am falling in love with you too. I did not expect it. I was not looking for it. But it happened anyway, quietly, in the small moments. In your kindness and your patience. In the way you sing. In the way you read poetry like it matters. In the way you look at this land you have built with such pride. I want to be part of that, Franklin. I want to build something with you." Franklin was around the table in an instant, pulling her up into his arms, holding her like she was something precious and fragile. "Truly, you will stay. You will marry me." "Yes," Delilah whispered against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, soap and leather and honest sweat. "Yes, I will stay. I will marry you. I will build a life with you." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his gray eyes shining with unshed tears. "May I kiss you, please?" she said, and then his mouth was on hers, gentle and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded. It was her first real kiss, and it felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Franklin rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret this choice," he promised. "I will work to deserve you, Delilah, I swear it." "You already do," she said softly. "Just be who you are. That is enough." The rain that had been threatening finally broke, drumming on the roof and turning the dusty yard to mud. They stood at the window, Franklin's arm around Delilah's shoulders, watching the storm. It was the first rain in weeks, and Delilah could see how it transformed the landscape, how the thirsty earth drank it in. "A good omen," Franklin said. "Rain on the day you decided to stay. The land is welcoming you." Timothy was delighted when they told him the news, whooping and slapping Franklin on the back. "About time you had some happiness, boss. And Miss Delilah, you have made the right choice." This old man was getting downright unbearable with his moping. "I am only 30, Franklin protested, but he was grinning. "Hardly old. You act old," Timothy teased. "But maybe Miss Delilah will help you remember how to have fun." They decided to marry as soon as it could be arranged. Franklin wanted to wait until Delilah was absolutely certain, but she assured him that her mind was made up. They would go to town the next day to arrange things with the Mormon bishop, who served as justice of the peace for the area. That night, for the first time, Delilah sat close to Franklin during the poetry reading, tucked under his arm on the settee. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, and she felt safer than she had in months, perhaps in years. "Will you sing for me?" she asked when he finished the poem. The parting glass again. Franklin's chest rumbled with his voice as he began the old song, and Delilah closed her eyes, hearing her mother's voice layered over his. But this time, instead of pure grief, she felt something else, a sense that her mother would have been happy for her. That she would have understood that life goes on, that love can bloom again even in the ashes of loss. The next week was a flurry of activity. They went to town and arranged to be married the following Saturday, the same day as the dance. It would be a double celebration, and half the town volunteered to help. The Mormon community, though Franklin and Delilah were not of their faith, embraced them warmly. Franklin was well liked and respected, and people were genuinely happy to see him settling down. Several of the ranch women took Delilah under their wing, including Timothy's married sister, whose name was Margaret. She was a brisk, practical woman of perhaps 30 who had helped Franklin prepare the house for Delilah's arrival. "I am glad Frank found someone," Margaret said as she helped Delilah adjust a dress that would serve as a wedding gown. "He has been alone too long. A person needs companionship, needs someone to share the burdens and joys of life. And you seem like a sensible woman, not some empty-headed girl looking for romance." "I have found romance anyway," Delilah admitted with a shy smile, "though I was not looking for it." Margaret's stern face softened. "The best kind, built on something real. You will do well together, I think. Frank is a good man, and you are a good woman. That is all a marriage really needs." The days leading up to the wedding felt both endless and impossibly short. Delilah and Franklin were learning each other, discovering preferences and habits, negotiating the small compromises that sharing a life required. Franklin was an early riser. Delilah preferred to linger in bed. He liked his coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. She preferred hers lighter. He was messy when he cooked. She insisted on cleaning as she went, but the differences felt surmountable, even charming. And the things they shared were more important. Both valued honesty and hard work. Both appreciated quiet evenings and good conversation. Both were orphans who understood loss and loneliness. Both wanted to build something lasting. Franklin taught Delilah more about riding, and she proved an apt student. He took her to the northern reaches of his property, showing her a meadow where wildflowers bloomed in the spring and a high point where you could see for miles in every direction. He talked about his plans for the ranch, about expanding the herd, about maybe someday building a larger house. But always he asked for her opinion, treated her as a partner rather than simply a wife who would be expected to follow his lead. Delilah, for her part, transformed the ranch house into a real home. She made curtains from fabric purchased in town, planted herbs near the kitchen door, organized the pantry with ruthless efficiency. She also began teaching herself the broader skills of ranch life, learning from Franklin and Timothy about tending cattle, about reading weather signs, about the practical realities of survival in this harsh landscape. The night before their wedding, Franklin walked Delilah to her bedroom door as had become their custom. But this time, he took both her hands in his, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Last chance to change your mind," he said, though she could hear the fear beneath the light words. "Tomorrow you become my wife for better or worse." "I am not changing my mind," Delilah assured him. "Are you?" "Never," he said fiercely. "I cannot believe my good fortune that you chose this life, that you chose me." "We chose each other," Delilah corrected. "That is what makes it real." He kissed her then, slow and deep, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. "Tomorrow," Franklin whispered. "Tomorrow you will be mine and I will be yours." "Tomorrow," Delilah agreed, though part of her wished tomorrow was already here. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the sky that impossible Arizona blue. Delilah dressed in the altered gown with Margaret's help, her hands shaking slightly as she fastened her mother's locket around her neck. "Something borrowed," Margaret said, handing her a handkerchief edged in delicate lace. "It was my grandmother's, and something blue." She pointed to the ribbon threaded through Delilah's hair. "Thank you," Delilah said, genuinely touched, "for everything. You have been so kind to a stranger." "You are not a stranger," Margaret said firmly. "You are Frank's bride, which makes you family. We look after our own out here." The ceremony took place in the small church the Mormon community had built, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Franklin stood at the front in his best suit, his hair slicked back and his face scrubbed clean, looking nervous and proud and happier than Delilah had yet seen him. Timothy stood beside him as best man, grinning broadly. As Delilah walked down the aisle on Margaret's husband's arm, her eyes locked with Franklin's and everything else faded away. This was right, she knew with absolute certainty. This man, this place, this life, it was where she was meant to be. The bishop kept the ceremony short and simple, which Delilah appreciated. When it came time for the vows, Franklin's voice was clear and strong, promising to love and cherish her all the days of his life. When it was her turn, Delilah's voice wavered only slightly as she promised the same, meaning every word with her whole heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the bishop declared. "You may kiss your bride." Franklin cupped Delilah's face in his hands with such tenderness that she felt tears spring to her eyes. When his lips met hers, the small church erupted in applause and cheers. They were married. She was Delilah Zimmerman now, wife to this good man, partner in this new life. The dance that followed was held in the largest barn in town, decorated with ribbons and wildflowers. Tables groaned under the weight of food that the community had provided, and a small group of musicians tuned their instruments in the corner. It was modest compared to the society weddings Delilah had occasionally glimpsed in Boston, but it felt more genuine, more joyful. Franklin had been truthful about his dancing skills. He was atrocious. But he threw himself into it with such good humor, laughing at his own mistakes and holding Delilah close even as he stepped on her toes repeatedly, that she could not help but laugh too. Other couples joined them on the floor, and Delilah was introduced to more people than she could possibly remember. Everyone was warm and welcoming, curious about the woman who had come from Boston to marry their Franklin. "He deserves this," one elderly woman told Delilah. "Lost too much too young, that boy. Good to see him happy again." As the evening wore on and the shadows grew long, Franklin pulled Delilah outside for a breath of air. They stood in the twilight, listening to the music and laughter spilling from the barn, his arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I thought possible a month ago," Delilah admitted. "When I left Boston, I was running from grief. I thought I would never feel joy again, but somehow I have found it here, with you." "I felt the same," Franklin said. "After my mother died, I thought I was finished with happiness, that my life would just be work and loneliness until I died. Then you stepped off that train, looking so frightened and determined, and something in me woke up. Hope, I suppose, the belief that maybe there was more for me after all." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Then Delilah said, "Sing for me, our song." Franklin smiled and began, his deep voice carrying the familiar melody into the night. But this time, when he reached the final verse, his voice changed slightly, adapting the old words. "But since it has fallen to my lot that I should rise and you beside me stand, I gently rise and to you call, good night and joy to you, my love, my wife, my friend." Delilah felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. She pulled Franklin down into a kiss that was both a promise and a celebration, a claiming and a surrender. When they broke apart, both were breathless. "Take me home," Delilah whispered. "Take me to our home." They made their excuses to their guests, enduring good-natured teasing and ribald jokes with as much grace as they could muster. Timothy promised to see to everything and shooed them away with a knowing grin. Then they were in Franklin's wagon, driving through the darkness toward the ranch, toward their future. The ranch house was dark when they arrived, but to Delilah it looked beautiful, its simple lines solid and welcoming. Franklin helped her down from the wagon and then, before she could protest, swept her up into his arms. "Carrying the bride across the threshold," he explained, his eyes twinkling. "It is tradition." "I did not know you cared about tradition," Delilah said, laughing. "I am learning," Franklin said, and carried her inside. Their wedding night was tender and awkward and perfect. They learned each other with careful hands and whispered words, building intimacy slowly. Franklin was patient and gentle, mindful of Delilah's innocence, and when they finally came together completely, it felt like a seal on everything they had promised in the church that morning. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Franklin's bed, their bed, now listening to the night sounds of the ranch and talking quietly about everything and nothing. Delilah traced the scars on Franklin's chest, souvenirs of a working life, and he played with the long fall of her hair, which she had unbound for the first time in his presence. "I love you," Franklin said as sleep began to claim them. "I know I said it before, but now I know it is true. Not just falling, but truly, deeply in love with you." "I love you too," Delilah murmured, nestled against his side. "My husband, my wife," he echoed, and she heard the wonder in his voice. Life settled into new rhythms after the wedding. Delilah threw herself into making the ranch truly theirs, working alongside Franklin and Timothy during the day, and falling into Franklin's arms each night. The work was hard but satisfying, and she discovered she had a talent for ranch management, keeping meticulous records of expenses and income, suggesting efficiencies that Franklin implemented with growing respect for her business acumen. The seasons turned, and Delilah experienced her first Arizona autumn with its crisp nights and golden days. Franklin taught her to shoot, patiently correcting her stance until she could hit a target reliably. She taught him to appreciate cooking as more than mere fuel, introducing him to recipes her mother had taught her and experimenting with new combinations. Their first Christmas together was modest but magical. They cut a juniper tree and decorated it with strings of berries and paper ornaments Delilah made. Timothy joined them for Christmas dinner, and they sang carols in three-part harmony, their voices rising into the rafters of the little house. In the spring, Delilah realized she was pregnant. The morning sickness was undeniable, and when she shared the news with Franklin, he looked so stunned and then so overjoyed that she laughed through her own tears. "A baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." "You will be a wonderful father," Delilah assured him, watching him process this enormous news. "I hope so," he said, still looking dazed. "I hope I can be half the father mine was before the war changed him." Margaret and the other ranch women rallied around Delilah, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and offering support. The community that had welcomed her as Franklin's bride now embraced her as one of their own, a woman building a life in their shared territory. The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was oppressive, and Delilah grew large and uncomfortable as the months passed. But Franklin was attentive to a fault, anticipating her needs before she could voice them, rubbing her aching back, and reading to her for hours when she was too tired to do anything but rest. In September of 1886, just over a year after Delilah had arrived in Snowflake, she went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when she wondered if she would survive it. But Margaret was there, and the midwife, and Franklin, who held her hand and spoke to her constantly, anchoring her through the worst of the pain. When their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Franklin wept openly. "A boy," he said, his voice breaking. "We have a son, Delilah." They named him James, after Delilah's father, and Robert, after Franklin's. James Robert Zimmerman, who had his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Franklin held the baby with such careful reverence, looking down at his son's tiny face with an expression of absolute wonder. "Thank you," he said to Delilah, his eyes shining with tears. "Thank you for this gift, for giving me a family again." "We built this together," Delilah reminded him, exhausted but happy. "You, me, and now James, we are a family." Timothy became the baby's honorary uncle, endlessly patient with the infants crying and fascinated by every small milestone. The ranch continued to thrive, with Franklin's careful management and Delilah's business sense proving to be a formidable combination. They hired another hand, a young man from town, which allowed Timothy to take on more responsibility and better wages. As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch house rang with laughter and noise. He was a bright, curious child, equally happy playing in the dirt with the ranch dogs or sitting on his father's lap during evening poetry readings. Franklin read to his son every night, passing on the gift his own mother had given him. On James's second birthday, as they celebrated with cake and presents in their growing circle of friends, Delilah pulled Franklin aside. "I am pregnant again," she told him quietly, watching joy bloom across his face. "Truly, another baby, truly. This one will arrive in the spring, I think." Franklin pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully, mindful of the life growing within her. "You have given me everything I never dared hope for," he said against her hair. "A wife I love, a son who brings me joy, and now another child on the way. I am the luckiest man alive." Their daughter arrived in April of 1889, an easier birth than James had been. They named her Emma Claire, and she had her father's gray eyes and her mother's delicate features. Franklin was, if possible, even more besotted with his daughter than he had been with his son, treating her like spun glass. "You cannot carry her everywhere forever," Delilah teased, watching him pace with Emma sleeping on his shoulder. "She needs to learn to be independent." "I know," Franklin said, but he made no move to put the baby down. "But she is so small. The world is so large and sometimes dangerous. I want to protect her from all of it." "You cannot protect them from everything," Delilah said gently. "All you can do is love them and teach them and trust that you have given them what they need to face the world." As the years passed, the ranch continued to grow. Franklin's careful breeding program produced cattle that were sought after throughout the territory. and his reputation as an honest, skilled rancher spread. They built an addition onto the house, giving the children their own rooms and creating a proper study where Delilah could manage the ranch's accounts and correspondence. James and Emma grew up wild and happy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with ranch chores as soon as they were able. Franklin taught them to respect the land and the animals, to work hard, and to keep their word. Delilah taught them letters and numbers, music and poetry, gentleness and grace. In 1892, their third child arrived, another son they named Thomas. And in 1895, their fourth and final child, a daughter named Sarah. The house was full to bursting with noise and life and love, exactly what both Franklin and Delilah had dreamed of during their own lonely childhoods. They faced hardships too, as all families do. There were years of drought when the cattle struggled and money was tight. There was the year James broke his arm falling from a horse, and the terrifying weeks when Emma contracted scarlet fever. Franklin's old war injuries sometimes plagued him, his back seizing up so badly he could barely move. Delilah had a miscarriage between Thomas and Sarah, a loss that left them both grieving, but through all of it, they had each other. On difficult days, Franklin would find Delilah in the kitchen and pull her into his arms, holding her until some of the tension eased. Delilah would sit beside Franklin on the porch after the children were asleep, their hands clasped, talking through problems until they found solutions. "You ever regret it?" Franklin asked her one evening when they had been married nearly 15 years. "Stepping off that train, taking a chance on a stranger?" Delilah looked at him in genuine surprise. "Never, not once. Do you regret placing that advertisement?" "God, no," Franklin said fervently. "Best decision I ever made, though I cannot take credit for it really. I was lonely and desperate and threw a prayer into the void. You were the miracle that answered." "We were both miracles for each other," Delilah said softly. "Two lonely people who found each other exactly when we needed to." As their children grew into young adults, beginning to think about their own futures, Franklin and Delilah found themselves with more time together. The ranch ran smoothly now, with James preparing to take over more responsibilities and Timothy, now a partner in the operation, managing much of the day-to-day work. They began taking evening walks again, just the two of them, retracing the path to that first spring where Franklin had taken Delilah when she was still deciding whether to stay. The cottonwoods had grown taller and the ranch had expanded, but the peace of that place remained unchanged. "I want to renew our vows," Franklin said one evening as they sat beside the spring, gray now threading through both their hair. "Have a proper ceremony with the children there, reaffirming everything we promised 20 years ago." 20 years, Delilah marveled. "It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." They did renew their vows on their 20th anniversary, with all 4 children in attendance, and half the town gathered to celebrate. Franklin sang for her again, that old Irish ballad that had brought them together, his voice still true though roughened with age. There was not a dry eye in the church when he finished, everyone knowing the story of how a mail-order bride had refused to leave the train until a cowboy sang her mother's favorite song. "I still do not know why I sang that song," Franklin admitted to her later, in the privacy of their bedroom. "I have asked myself 1,000 times what prompted me. It was not calculation, it was more like instinct, like something beyond myself knew what was needed in that moment. Fate," Delilah said, "or providence, or love recognizing itself even when we did not yet know it. Does it matter why? What matters is that you did, and I stayed, and we built this beautiful life together." Franklin pulled her close, and even after 20 years of marriage, her heart still quickened at his touch. "I love you, Delilah Zimmerman, more today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." "That is terribly poetic for a simple rancher," Delilah teased, but her eyes were soft with affection. "I learned from the best," Franklin said, and kissed her the way he had on their wedding night, with tenderness and passion and promise. As they moved into their later years, Franklin and Delilah became the elder statesmen of the ranching community. Young couples came to them for advice, and they freely shared the wisdom earned through decades of partnership. Always, their advice was the same: respect each other, communicate honestly, never go to bed angry, and remember that love is both a feeling and a choice you make every single day. James married a teacher from town and gave them their first grandchildren. Emma married Timothy's nephew, keeping the families bound even closer together. Thomas took over management of the ranch, expanding it further with his parents' blessing and investment. Sarah, their youngest, surprised them all by becoming a doctor, one of the first women to practice medicine in the territory. Franklin and Delilah built a smaller house on the ranch property, leaving the main house to Thomas and his growing family. But they remained active, Franklin still riding out to check cattle well into his 60s, Delilah still managing the books and teaching her grandchildren their letters. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their small house watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Franklin took Delilah's hand. "Have I told you recently that you are the best thing that ever happened to me?" "Only every day for the past 35 years, Delilah said with a smile, "but I never tire of hearing it." "Good, because I plan to keep saying it for however many years we have left." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The ranch was thriving, their children were happy and successful, and they had built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. No regrets. Franklin asked, echoing the question he had asked so many times over the years. "None," Delilah said firmly. "This life exceeded every dream I dared to have. You exceeded them." "Same for me," Franklin said softly. "That terrified young woman who would not leave the train, she became the love of my life, the mother of my children, my partner in everything. If I could go back and live my life again, I would not change a single moment." As full darkness fell and stars began to emerge in the vast desert sky, they rose and went inside, arms around each other's waists. They had built something rare and precious, a love that had started with a song and had grown deeper and richer with every passing year. A love that had weathered hardship and celebrated joy. A love that had created a family and a legacy. In their bedroom, Franklin pulled out the old, battered poetry book that had belonged to his mother. He read to Delilah the way he had for decades, his voice wrapping around the familiar words. And when he finished, Delilah asked him to sing, one more time, the song that had changed both their lives. Franklin sang, his voice wavering now with age but still carrying the melody that had brought them together so many years ago. Delilah closed her eyes and listened, transported back to that day on the train when she had been so frightened and uncertain, when the future had seemed impossible to face. That terrified young woman could never have imagined this full, rich life built on the foundation of one impulsive decision. She could never have imagined loving this deeply, this completely. She could never have imagined the joy that would come from taking the greatest risk of her life. But she had stepped off that train. She had trusted her instincts and Franklin's song and the possibility of something better, and in doing so, she had found everything she had never known she was looking for. "I love you," she whispered when Franklin finished singing. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Franklin replied, pulling her close, "my mail-order bride who became my everything." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had almost every night for 35 years. And in their dreams, they were young again, standing beside a train in a dusty Arizona town, with a song hanging in the air between them and an entire lifetime of love stretching out ahead, full of promise and possibility and joy.